Okay. Hello, we are back in Lab 3. And I hope you're ready for the next session. If you have any questions that come up during the session while watching the live stream, please do write them into the chat so we can answer them at the end. And now a big round of applause for deepbluev7, also known as Nico from Neko.
Terrible name.
Who will tell us how to fix security issues in a decentralized system with multiple vendors.
I mean, that's a good introduction, but actually I all clickbaited you, so I actually don't really have answers for you. That's my first problem with this talk. Like, I don't have any solutions, I only bring problems. That's what people also usually say about me, so that's nothing new, but also in this talk. And another thing that's important, this is a complicated topic, and I don't want to assign blame to anyone or something, so I want to get it out ahead of time so that it isn't misunderstood. But now let's get into what this talk is actually about. So let's just assume there's a security issue in the matrix protocol. It's actually in the specification, so it affects all clients, all servers, and it might even be actively abused already. And you find it, what are you going to do about it, and what's the process behind it, and what might be the problems that we have with the current process possibly, or just in general because it's because of the topic. So just to see what the ecosystem is about, it's actually quite big. Like, we have different servers like Conduit, Harmony, Synapse. We have lots of different clients. We have different bridges. And all of those could possibly be affected by a security issue that's really a core part of the protocol. And so when we need to fix them, we, of course, run into a lot of problems. Now, how do we even start with that? Well, first of all, talking to your friends about a security issue or talking publicly about it isn't really a disclosure. That's not really how you report a security issue. It might be fun to do that, but it doesn't really help anyone, and it just causes a lot of pain. So don't do that. Actually send an email to security@matrix.org. The process is outlined also on the matrix.org website. So if you ever forget about it or need more information about it, you can find that information there. But that's just the start. The actually fixing the security issue, that isn't done with that. You just reported it. So what does it actually do when you send out the report to the email address? There's a few informations on the website now that wasn't quite the case a few years ago about what happens when you send such a report. First of all, they tell you, okay, they will work with you to establish a time frame for how this will be fixed, when this will be fixed, and when you can publicly talk about it. And they even say some times on when they think this will be fixed, and this will be interesting later, because they say, okay, usually it should be like 90 days that we assume we need to fix it, but sometimes we might extend it to 120 days. I left out a bit of stuff because this is it wouldn't have fit on the slides, but this is just the times that are assumed when you talk to the security email, but it could also be a longer time frame if it's especially complicated to fix. Then it says we will always transparently let the community know about any incident that affects them, but it's not necessarily clear what's meant with that. Like, okay, what does it mean to let the community know? Will you just tell everyone immediately about the security issue? That's probably not the intent of that. So then when will you be told about it? This sentence is probably mostly there because Matrix is an open protocol, and openness is very important to the protocol. So of course you want to inform the community at some point about what happened and stuff, but it doesn't mean that during the security process of fixing it that everyone will necessarily be involved with it. And then there's also another sentence that's quite interesting, is that in some cases that they might delay publishing like the technical details about how the security issue can be abused. That of course makes sense. If they announce a fix for a security issue, they don't immediately want to post how people can abuse it. They want to give people time to learn about this and then update their clients or servers so that the issue can't be abused anymore. So now, we assumed it's an issue with the core protocol, and in those cases, currently, any fix to the specification needs to be done through the MSC process. And there we already run into our first problem. Well, currently the spec releases happen about every 3 months. I'm not sure how really nailed down that schedule is, so I'm not making any promises there. But if you say, okay, we will usually fix this within 90 days, and you're doing a spec release every 3 months, and this security fix might need a spec fix, then the 90 days already sound very optimistic, especially if you know this MSC process and know that this is sometimes a bit more involved and you need to discuss with a lot of people, then possibly that already won't work out as you were hoping to. Then the next thing is the MSC process is public because, again, transparency, openness is very important for the matrix protocol. But then how do you deal with the security issue? You can't tell the people that, okay, the security issue can be abused in this way and that's why we need to fix it. You need to find somehow other reasonings that still make sense for the MSC and then publish that. And when someone then asks more complicated questions, it's very difficult to answer that in public. But also, on the other side, when you reported a security issue, it's hard to participate in this in the process because you can't really talk about the security issue on the MSC. You can communicate over the email address, but then you have like an extra corner to the communication that you always have to take to make any adaptations to the MSC where you might see it as not addressing the problem. So that's already quite complicated and something maybe someone else will have to solve. Again, I'm not providing any solution. And then again, also you have the deprecation policy that Matrix defines, and that says, okay, when we are removing a feature, that it will first be deprecated, and then it will be removed at a later date by a different MSC. So now if you have a really security relevant change that might affect an endpoint that needs to get removed or something, then that might be a problem for you because you can't really keep that compatibility promise. If you say, okay, I want to fix the security issue within 90 days, but I need like basically 2 spec cycles to actually fix the issue, and then be able to resolve it and have everyone use a fixed version of the matrix specification. It also says usually there's one version in between, but often cases for most deprecated endpoints so far it has been way longer because we have lots of deprecated endpoints that can still be used. But yeah. Then another issue you quickly run into is just how the spec is versioned, because currently the matrix spec version just increases linearly. There's no semantic version attached to it that, okay, matrix 2.0 is a breaking release with breaking compatibility, and before that no deprecated endpoints are removed. It's just linearly updating, but it also means that if a feature is added in an earlier version, like the threads were in version 1.4, then a server will have to support that first before they can possibly apply any security fixes. Because if a client checks for the version that it's allowed to use, it will check for the version that has the security fix, which might be 1.6, for example. And then if the server doesn't support 1.4 yet, it can claim support for 1.6 legally. So from the spec perspective. So you're kind of in a bind there where your clients can't use the fixed versions of the endpoint because some other unrelated part in the specification isn't supported by the server yet. There's somewhat of a solution for that. You can define like for MSCs during the process, you have unstable flags where you say, okay, this feature, when you see this unstable flag in the in the version response, you can use this feature already, even though it's not in a spec version already. And some MSCs also, like Spaces, for example, used a stable flag as well, so that you could use the stable endpoints when the MSC was already merged. And that could, in theory, also extend it for like security issues, for example, so that you just say, okay, if the server doesn't support 1.6 yet, use this stable flag to check for it, and then you also have can call those endpoints. But that's not really something that's intended in the matrix spec versioning process. Then, on the other hand, when you have then fixed the matrix spec, You then run into the problem, okay, how do you get actually servers to support this new version? Because you somehow need to communicate with them. And currently, most of the development on Matrix happens in the public. All the developer rooms are usually public. Some of them are private now because people don't want to talk to other people. But in general, it's public. And when you can't just waltz in there and say, well, I have a security issue and you have to fix it now, because then everybody will know about that this can be abused. You're putting a lot of pressure on the server developers suddenly now, because you just publicly disclose the security vulnerability. And yeah, that's just complicated. There's not really a place to talk about known home server developers privately, apart from sending them a DM individually, and that doesn't necessarily always happen. It happened for some cases that I was involved in, but it's not really clear what's the process behind there, and it also doesn't necessarily always happen, especially when it affects everyone. In those cases, I'll talk about it later, how it's often done. Then you also have the problem that not everyone develops at the same schedule as other people do. For example, some people develop a home server but have university and they might have exams, so they might be unavailable for 2 months, and then you already again run into the problem. You already took 90 days to fix the spec. Now you need another 2 months to possibly wait for the servers to update, and you're running into a lot of delays because of just how decentralized the Matrix ecosystem is, which is good in some ways, but on the other hand, when you're trying to fix a security issue, then, well, being too far spread out can become a problem. And then lastly, also sadly, not every home server supports the latest version of the specification. So if there's now a security fix, we run into the earlier talked about problem that they will possibly have to implement a lot of versions to get to the security fix, which might not necessarily be possible with their resources. Then, on the other hand, we have a very similar problem on the client side. There you also, most of the development happens in public, but, and whenever you talk to a lot of people, then someone might talk about it publicly. We also had this happen before with a security issue where some security issue affected multiple home servers, and it was reported to some of them, and some of them immediately pushed a fix, which basically made the security issue public, because the one developer said, okay, it's very important to fix it now, and the others disagreed. They said, we want to fix it together, all at the same time, and, well, that's just how it is when you work in a large group. Not everyone necessarily agrees, and usually some information will leak out, which you usually don't want in the security process. Then, again, no regular releases, but on the other hand, clients have it a bit easier to support newer Matrix versions, because they don't, servers are basically required to support everything. Clients can pick and choose a lot more on what they think is important, and don't have that big of a responsibility that they will talk to different that different clients will connect to them, which is the case for servers that might call different endpoints, but clients usually can restrict their feature set without impacting other clients and servers too much. So they have it a bit easier here. Then, once you maybe got all your software updated, your servers, your clients, also your bridges, I left them now out because they are basically clients from my perspective. Well, now you need to get the server operators to update. When everyone has a home server, so like literally a home server where they have a small computer sitting at home under their desk, then that's a lot of computers to update with lots of different operators that all need to be notified and know about, okay, this is security relevant, I should really update, and I can't wait for when I'm maybe have holiday in the next time or something, but I actually should do it now. Similarly, they're a bit easier as it usually to get users to update. They might use an outdated client when they're using it from their distribution, but then the client developer can still notify the distribution that that there's a security fix and get the client updated. And then usually users update a lot more easily, especially when they are using a web client. But still, you have a lot more users, and some will not update, and if the security fix possibly involves something breaking, then in some cases the client users aren't that affected, because then possibly something just won't work, which is noticeable but not that terrible. But if it's really security relevant, like a problem in the encryption, then you really need them to update, and it might not be visible to them, and then it becomes a lot more complicated again. So how does it currently work when you have a security issue that affects really a lot of parts of the protocol? Well, it's kind of talked about like an open secret in that case. You talk about, okay, you're doing a big change at a specific date or something. It's not quite clear why it's happening. You're not disclosing any more information. You're just telling people that it's happening and that they will need to update and that they should update. And basically the same message gets just publicly posted for everyone, and nobody is really approached individually because it affects everyone, and that would be a lot of overhead. On the other hand, that of course makes it a lot harder to keep details secret. And on the other hand, some people might also not feel like they are actually affected by the issue and that they should actually act on it. For example, a home server developer might not see the immediate need for that change because they're behind anyway, and they are not aware how security relevant that is, because you're intentionally leaving that out to not give others people a heads up who might benefit from being able to abuse security sensitive stuff. But on the other hand, at least with those public announcements, there's usually a very clear timeline attached to them. So people know when things will happen, and if they have the time and see it as relevant enough, they can actually prepare for that and implement their fixes at the same time. On the other hand, yeah, as I said, it's not really direct communication. Some people might miss the message, feel like it's not meant for them, and just not be aware of the impact that an issue might be having on them. Another thing that's not necessarily clear is who's actually behind the securitymatrix.org address. Like it was clarified at some point that that the matrix.org namespace is owned by the foundation, and they are responsible for it, and they can decide who has access to it. But at least to some extent, I think this is operated by Element, and the Element security team will work on security reports. But then is the whole SCT involved and gets an email about a security issue and can then know the thoughts behind an MSC, or are the developers then involved? That's really not clearly spelled out, and that might cause conflicts with priorities. This used to be a lot more of a problem in the past from my experience. Nowadays you get a quick answer from people, but in the past it was even less clearly defined, and that I think caused a few problems in some cases. So now something a bit more personal. I also reported a security issue at some point that was a bit more than 2 years ago. I then did get an auto reply, but then I got no real response for like 5 months, which already conflicts with what's stated on the website. On the other hand, the website also changed in that time. Nowadays, the timelines are a lot more clearly laid out, and they are also a lot better followed. So this isn't the case anymore, but that was what it was back then. Then now there's also, for most of the stuff that I reported, there are fixes in place. I also reported a lot of stuff later, and they will probably disclose at some point. I don't think that happened yet. Yeah, in general, the process has improved a lot, but it was really difficult to just communicate over such a lossy transmission, because you didn't really know who you were talking to. You didn't know how much you could impact it, and then people had different opinions on how to solve it, and it was very hard to exchange like patches, to exchange discussion on how the MSC for it should look like, and in general, just the communication was quite difficult, because it was a very thin line that we were basically communicating over with different people that were then replying to you, and didn't necessarily always have the time available to respond to it quickly, and yeah, it just dragged on a bit. But again, this nowadays, when I report a security issue, that goes a lot quicker. I usually get a reply within a few days, and even the fixes are usually, for the less important stuff, are usually in place really quickly. So that improved a lot. It just used to be not that great. So now I said, okay, I don't really have solutions to offer here to anyone, but I did go and shop around a bit with, okay, what are other projects doing? For example, there's this open wall project, which is basically a mailing list, which has different kind of scopes, basically, for people, where you have on one, the security people from different distributions and projects involved, so that only they will get an email. For example, if you're not quite clear about the impact of a security issue, I think this was, for example, the SSH backdoor using for the libLZMA or something that was posted to one of those mailing lists first. The people discussed it, figured out the impact, troubleshooted it, and figured out a way on how they will approach it and how they will disclose it to everyone. And I think this it also has a lot of complications, of course, because you're, again, including a lot of vendors, but you at least have restricted set of only the security people from the relevant parts, so restricting it a bit to not any developer, and the people that are working or are involved, they are usually, at least to some extent, experts in the area, so they can respond a lot more professional to it than maybe I would do when I was a new client developer and it was like my third patch to the project or something. It also, yeah, the nice part about that is that it just is across implementation, so you don't have, when you that you're just talking to the Synapse developers, for example, you have all the home server developers, or would have all the home server developers in one room or one mailing list, and everyone could participate in the discussion without having like walls maybe around companies or the foundation specifically, but instead could be a lot more open while still being a closed set of people. And then this mailing list is also subscribed to by a lot of, for the open wall model, the distributions that need to update packages and such. So they will then get notifications partially ahead of time or then publicly when they're possibly smaller or less trusted. And they will then be able to update their stuff and be notified about security issues in one somewhat centralized place, which has the benefit that you have a channel to actually communicate about security issues to the people that it's relevant for, which then makes it much easier to update. Yeah, then another, apart from the open wall model, maybe security issues should be excluded from the normal MSC process. Maybe there should be a bit of a faster process for changes that are security relevant. That of course opens then the spec to abuse, because possibly the SCT would just be responsible for it and could then push their changes without going through the open. But maybe for the scrutiny for that can happen after that issue is fixed. And we can trust the SCT in that extent that we can say, okay, when they will figure out a solution for it, then we can participate later in the process and work with them on it. And then we could also possibly say, okay, when it's really security relevant, maybe we should also be able to adapt changes to older spec versions at the endpoints also as required there in like a minor release for that spec version, so that possibly we could get a bit away from the linear process that excludes a lot of home server developers. Yeah, that's pretty much what I have on this topic. I have linked one discussion room here. That's a discussion room I made for the spec a while ago. That's just a bit more less rules about it, because the main spec rooms are about stuff that's directly affecting the spec, and this is more, it's between the spec process and the spec, like there's also the spec process room, but I think this might be a good room if you have thoughts about this later down the line, to just come in and discuss it, and even if you don't have a solution for it. But also, now that I'm done with my talk, maybe someone here has some ideas on it, on how things could be improved. And yeah, that's pretty much what I had to say on this topic.
Thanks a lot, Nico. Do we have any questions in the audience?
So I just looked around the audience. Seems like I'm the only member of SCT here in the room. So I can actually, I have a few answers to your questions that were in the deck. So first off, no, SCT does, like not entire SCT receives emails that are sent to security at matrix.org. And there is a very simple reason to that. Security at matrix.org is connected to operations of one specific home server instance. And that's the instance at matrix.org. SCT has nothing, okay, mostly nothing to do with what is happening with matrix.org, and some security issues actually have nothing, most security issues have nothing to do with the spec to begin with. It's like if you have a buffer overflow somewhere in the code, then it has nothing to do with the spec. Second, when it comes to dealing with security vulnerabilities in distributed environment, usually divide and conquer model is really helping to sort of compartmentalize the damage. If we find out that it actually is the spec problem, and we do conceal this from others for quite some time, we may develop MSCs in the hidden for some limited time, specifically for the sake of embargo. And for no, like we hate to do that, but we are effectively obliged to do that. Then, like at a certain point, and usually we do limited disclosure about the vulnerability to server to home server authors, and just definitely not just Synapse, it's also conduit authors, for example. And we share this information so that we could disclose the vulnerability in a more or less concerted way. And that's pretty much what everybody else in open source community does. It's not our invention. Yeah. And finally, when it comes to actually dealing with the problems in the spec is something that is made for humans. It's not made for machines. And that's actually a good benefit because people can go ahead and do spec-incompliant changes in their code upfront, like without any kind of formal endorsement from our end, just because they want to cover their own rears. And in this way, we are actually achieving a bit better robustness across the ecosystem, even if we as SCT, and I totally admit that, may move at glacial pace with actually like taking something to the paper and approving that MSC and getting it through our the processes and such. So that kind of eases out the entire picture in a way. But yeah, fixing vulnerabilities in distributed environments is always hard, and usually everybody is surviving on their own in one way or another. It's really about damage control, more about how do we fix the ecosystem as a whole at once, overnight, and let everybody else know. That just does not exist, even in the theoretical world. So yeah, just my feedback on the subject. But yeah, thanks for the talk. It's very acute subject.
Yeah. Also, I didn't intend to say that this process or something doesn't happen, or that the process currently isn't already trying very well. I just wanted to explain the problem space that there is, because it's quite easy to say that security issues take too long to fix or something, but that's simply not easy to fix them in a distributed system. And I wanted to explain why, possibly why this is the case, and maybe someone else has a good idea on how we can improve some parts of that. And yeah, that was basically the point of the talk. Anything else?
Any more questions? Now or never? Okay, in that case, thank you, Nico.